This happened in 1932, when the state penitentiary was still at Cold Mountain. And the electric chair was there too, of course. Stephen King's 23rd novel, The Green Mile, was a very odd experiment that, in my opinion, worked perfectly. See, King was having a small issue trying to figure out how to write a specific idea that had come to him when he was fighting insomnia. The illness, not the book. And one of his editor friends suggested the idea of writing it in installments, like the old novels of Charles Dickens and other Victorian authors' day. So King wrote it that way, publishing each part as a single book that ended in a cliffhanger, forcing readers to wait to keep reading and, in King's own words, being unable to skip to the end to make sure that there will be a happy ending. This meant that it was written at the same time that it was being published, so there are a couple of mistakes in continuity. But the story itself is very strong. A few years after the original edition of 6 books, a new collection was made with all books in one volume, which in my opinion, well, it may be more comfortable for your library, but it makes you lose a little bit of the original experience. But enough the introduction. I'm AdalisaZ, and today we're going to walk together The Green Mile. Believe it or not, The Green Mile was a result of a serious case of writer's block on Stephen King's part, as well as a nasty bout of insomnia and very lucky timing because an editor wanted to make an experiment. As I said in the introduction, the experiment was, would audiences enjoy again a novel written and published serially, just like they had in Dickens' time? Having to wait a month between installments, not being able to get past a certain point until the next installment was published, and much more importantly, not being able to go to the end to see if everything was going to end up fine. The most interesting thing here was that not only the readers wouldn't know how the novel ended, but also King himself was forced to wait. See, it's very, very rare that King starts with an outline for a novel. By his own admission, he begins with an idea and then starts writing, letting the characters guide how the story goes. This is how Paul Sheldon survived, by the way. In King's original idea, he was going to die at Annie Wilkes' hands, and we are very glad that he didn't. Of course, this also means that you will see a few contradictions in the chapters, but the story is mesmerizing enough that you may not care if you notice them, as long as you're reading the original 6-book edition, because in the compiled volume, those mistakes were corrected by an editor. So what is The Green Mile about? Let me summarize. Paul Edgecombe was the death row supervisor at Cold Mountain Penitentiary in 1932. The death row is nicknamed the Green Mile due to the green tiles that mark the floor, and he usually has very little prisoners there. However, in 1932 is a year to remember, and we know that as he's writing his memoirs in 1996. And we know that as he's writing his memoirs in 1996, about the year of Edward Delacroix, William Wharton, Billy the Kid only to himself, and of course, John Coffey. While both Edward and William are guilty of the crimes they committed, rape and arson and murder respectively, and in the case of William, he is quite proud of announcing what he did to anyone who may want or not want to listen about it, John Coffey never says that he is guilty. While the crime he was accused of has apparently enough evidence to send Coffey to Old Sparky, the attitude of Coffey at the Mile poses Edgecombe as most of his co-workers, with one exception, Percy Wetmore. Percy, the nephew of the governor, is ill-suited to be a guard at death row. He is mean, just for the sake of being mean. He didn't understand that men in death row have nothing to fear anymore, since they can only be executed once, and tried to be a big shot like in the cop novels he liked to read. That caused troubles for Edgecombe, especially when Percy decided to pick on Delacroix, as the French prisoner had somehow gotten himself a pet mouse, Mr. Jingles, and Percy hated him with all his heart. But the real challenge comes when Paul realizes that not only John Coffey is innocent, but also that the huge black man is an empathic healer, capable of doing miracles that no one can. Let's start with the elephant in the room. The death penalty is a very controversial issue, and there are a lot of reasons why people support it. Personally, I don't, and one of the reasons why is precisely the point given in this novel, but we will talk about it later. For now, let's start with the important consideration that even the worst criminals in the world have human rights, but that is something that we rarely ever see in entertainment. Guilty people are guilty, and horrible monsters most of the time. And the Green Mile really leans on it with Wild Will, the actual nickname most people use for William Wharton. He's a monster, through and through, guilty as hell, proud of it, and ready to cause problems no matter what. However, he's not the only prisoner we have in the novel, nor the only guilty one. But King managed very well to show them first as humans and then as criminals, with one big exception: John Coffey himself. Well, we first meet all the other prisoners, even the ones who are no longer in the death row for various reasons. Edcombe tells us about how well they behaved during the imprisonment. In particular, when talking about Delacroix, he says that whatever evil was in him when he committed their crimes, it was completely gone by the time he arrived at the Grain Mall. But with Coffey, we first learn of what he did, how he was arrested, and it is all created so we have the same idea that Edcombe had at first. If anyone deserved to fry, it was John Coffey. What was his crime? Well, basically, he was found with the dead bodies of two adorable twins of just 10 years of age. The girls had not been only killed, they had also been raped, and so Coffey was very lucky that he hadn't been just hanged on the spot, given that he is black and this was the 20s. But pretty soon we find out that there has to be a longer story, because Coffey doesn't act at all like a merciless killer. It's not that he did it and now he repents. It's that he never says anything about the crime except that he was too late to reverse it. And yes, that's a big clue. He's quiet, only sits on his cell without bothering anyone, and Edgecombe suspects that he's not mentally competent given that he can't even tie his own shoelaces. And he's always crying. In many ways, Coffey is a mystery, but he's not said to be anything but guilty, at least until book 3. In contrast, when we are introduced to Edward Delacroix, we are first told one teeny little fact about him. He had a pet mice that he loved more than life itself. A little brown mouse called Mr. Jingles, who could play funny tricks and loved to eat peppermint candies. He's also bullied by Wetmore, the only officer in the Green Mile shift that didn't treat the prisoners like people, but like punching bags all the time. And once we get to like the little Frenchman and his pet mice, we learn what he did. He raped a little girl, killed her, panicked, decided to burn her body, and the fire extended to the building next door, killing 6 other people, including 2 more kids. Of course he'd get the death sentence after that. But the problem is, we met him when he has repented and accepted that he deserves to die for it. So while we may agree that he had to be sent to his death, we also agree that absolutely no one deserves to die the way he does. There is a reason why the book where he's killed was titled The Bad Death of Edward Delacroix, and even that title underestimates how bad it was. Oh yes, and then we find out that Coffey is not only completely innocent, but that he's also so damn good that he tried to help the girl survive, even if he was too late. That's what he meant by too late to reverse it. And that there is absolutely nothing that Edgecombe or the other good guards in the mile can do to stop his execution. Now, if you think that the book takes the position that the death sentence is wrong because they kill an innocent man, you'd be wrong. Yes, Edgecombe and his team are unable to keep working at death row after Coffey's death, but Coffey himself is actually glad to die. The only thing he dislikes is the darkness created by the hood he must wear, and of course the hate that he can feel because he's sympathetic from all the people around him who don't know that he's innocent. What makes the book be quite vocal against the death penalty is, curiously, the death of a guilty man, and that is the death of Edward Delacroix. As I pointed out before, King takes great pains into making Delacroix sympathetic despite his horrible crime. He accepts he's going to die, that he deserves to die, But at the same time, he's so nice and unassuming that when we met him, it's hard not to feel bad for him. Seeing him not as the horrible killer he is, but as the victim of Percy Wetmore's constant bullying, which makes him even more vulnerable as we see him crying for mercy, well, that makes it more difficult to hate him. And there is, of course, Mr. Jingles, the morality pet that everybody remembers from the movie. How can you hate a man who is so unthreatening that a mouse likes to sleep on his chest? And Edward gets the worst death of the whole book. A show of how cruel the death penalty can be, how it's not fast, not painless, and if one little thing goes wrong, or someone sabotages the process, it can be horrifying. Again, Edward deserves death. He was condemned to it, and he never fought a sentence, and his crime was horrible. But still he didn't deserve the torture of how he died. This goes pretty much to every single prisoner that Edgar tells us about. The ones who got a pardon before sitting on Old Sparky, the ones who didn't and went to their death with dignity. None of them are called innocent, except for Coffee. There is no argument that we should not have the death penalty because of a greater number of innocent people being sent to their deaths. But at the same time, the book doesn't rob the guilty of their humanity, even if their crimes were inhuman, and thus it presents us with the situation in which the death penalty, as we have it now, both in the electric chair and now by lethal injection, is a excessively cruel punishment. And that is a hard act to balance, if you ask me. This is why we have to pay attention to the role of Percy Wetmore and why Percy is so important. The other guards understand the rules of the game. They know that their most important part of the job is to keep their death row inmates calm, because where they are, the prisoners have nothing to lose if they decide to make trouble, and that would end bad for both prisoners and guards. While the whole team treats most of the prisoners with respect, they never forget that they are criminals. There are rules to treat them, which includes that a guard never enters the cell when there is not another guard present, that they walk in the middle of the hallway, not close to the cell so that the prisoners can't reach them. Percy forgets this one very often, and it's more of a way to show how he really doesn't see the prisoners as people, much less as a danger. That they don't let them know that there is a rehearsal for their execution to keep them as calm as possible. Percy constantly bullies those who he sees as unable to defend themselves, tries to torture Delacroix by reminding him all the time that he's going to die, and of course, at one point kills Mr. Jingles. Do not worry, thanks to John Coffey, our beloved mouse gets better. And of course, on the other end of the spectrum, we have Billy the Kid, where all the other prisoners also behave following a code, where if the guards don't mess with them, they don't mess with the guards. William does his best to be a problem at all times. And part of it is because he honestly believes that he will get a pardon despite having killed 4 people, one of them a pregnant woman. Why? Simple. He has an advantage that Coffee doesn't have. He's a white young man, and that still gets people's sympathy no matter what. We just need to check the news to see that. The Green Mile is not an easy book to read. Well, I should correct that. The story and the narrative go quite easy, and it's not hard to get caught by the way in which good old Encombe lets us know the story of the events that happened. However, it's not easy to digest given the subjects that it touches, of morality, justice, law, and death. Still, it's an amazing read, and one great movie for once, so I can recommend to both read the book and watch the movie in that order for a great afternoon in which you may cry a little bit at the end, or a lot. I want to thank my dear patrons, Mitch Hyman, Elaine Ho, Jessica, and Ellie Riley, as well as my first supporter Tania Pineda and Amy Song, who is the best person in the universe and without whom these videos would not exist. I also want to remind you that if you want to support these and my other projects and get your name mentioned here, you can do so at patreon.com/Adalisa, written link on the description, as I know my name can be hard to spell. And with just $1 a month, you will always be thanked in my videos, as well as get access to a ton of art before anyone else. Or, if you prefer a one-off offer, a coffee with just one donation of 3 USD, you will get mentioned in the 3 next videos I make. If you can support me this way, I also accept likes, subscriptions to the channel, and of course, you sharing the links. I also welcome all your questions, feedbacks, and suggestions in the comments below. And now, it's time to leave the green mail and go on a road trip. Just be wary. We may have to cross a town that has seen much, much better days. So join me next time when we visit a little town called Desperation.